Ms. Stevens, did you say aye?
I did.
Oh, sorry, didn't hear you. Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go into public comment very quickly. Is there anyone online who would like to provide public comment? I see two numbers. 206-683-3336 or 360-298-5098. Public comment. Without hearing anything, we will move on to our first agenda item. Mr. Borman?
I'm here.
Mr. Gaylor, are you here as well?
Yes, I am here and ready.
So, Lincoln, would you mind if we flipped you and the prosecutor? Supposedly the prosecutor has a time-sensitive situation. Is that true, Randy?
Deputy's handling that. I'm ready to go on your schedule.
All right, well, never mind then. So we will begin our departmental budget revision discussion today with Lincoln Borman from the Land Bank. Lincoln?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mylene?
I'm actually on the agenda before that.
Oh,
it's hard
sorry
to see because it's the bottom of the first page.
My apologies, Mr. Borman. So at 9:15 we have discussion Auditor's Department budget review. Mylene Henley. Sorry, I did not see that. My apologies. Mylene.
And this is actually not my department. It is just an overview of the process, which will be very quick.
Excellent. Please begin.
I am going to share my desktop, I hope. Okay, so I was just going to talk about what we're doing here and why we're doing it. As council is aware, we had in our preliminary look at the effect of the pandemic on the county budget, we calculated about a $100,000 shortfall for both 2020 and 2021. And that is even after including reductions from furlough, from IT reductions, including additional revenue from the grant relief, eliminating transfers to the Budget Stabilization Fund and including a transfer, eliminating the transfer to and including a transfer from the Budget Stabilization and including the effects of the early retirements. Because $1 million is approximately 5% of the approximately $20,000 current expense budget, all departments and most funds were asked to reduce costs by at least 5% in 2020 and 2021. And that in doing so, they could not count the furloughs, IT, or early retirements because all of those have already been calculated into the budget. I would say that in current expense, all but 3 departments did achieve that 5%, although I think some of the solutions are a little impractical, but we'll see that when we get into the departmental discussions. If you include all of the departmental proposals, which I have done in my kind of working summary, we definitely make a big difference moving from ending cash of $1.8 million in our kind of early COVID adjustment budget to 2.6, and ending cash in 2021 goes from a negative number of almost $1 million to a positive 634,000. Obviously, that's still not enough. Just so everybody's clear, revenue assumptions in the working budget are that property tax and assessments collected with property tax are assumed to come in on budget. General sales tax revenue is projected at 20% less than the 2019 revenue for both 20 and 21. Revenue from planning and permitting were revised this past week by the director. We had initially projected about a $330,000 decrease in revenue, and that was improved by about $250,000. So definitely not look, planning is not doing well, but building so far seems to be on track. But part of that increase was offset by a further decrease in interest income projections from the treasurer. Lodging tax, which is just a portion of sales tax, is projected at 50% less than 2019 for both 20 and 21. Camping fees are projected at 60% less than budgeted. So far, we're looking at 2020 only. Real estate excise tax and the capital improvement fund is projected at 5% less than 2019 for both 20 and 21. And CAPRON funds, this is in the roads fund, are projected at about 12% less. It's actually 15% less on MVFT, which is a portion of CAPRON funds. And the MVFT funds themselves are projected. This is an error. It says 32%, but it's actually 15% less than originally budgeted. Grant assumptions, the FEMA reimbursements to current expense, which we had put in at $100,000, we've increased to $268,000. That's what the grant manager believes that we will be getting in FEMA funds. The CARES funding has been distributed according to council direction at last week's meeting, and an additional $150,000 of federal health grants is going, a small portion to grants and the balance to current expense. Just some caveats about this. In a normal year, current expense spends about 96% of budget. We never exceed budget because we can't legally exceed budget. A lot of the reductions that you'll see are basically cuts. They are nibbling into the edges, and they're basically using up that unspent 4%. So we're going to come in this year a lot closer to 100% of budget. How real are the cuts? Well, we're all optimists at this point and hoping that we won't spend more money than we have available. Some things we can definitely choose not to spend, such as furniture, some office supplies we can be put off. Others are contingency items, which we have to spend if we need them, whether it's budgeted or not, such as repair and maintenance items and detention costs, of course. And those we may optimistically say, okay, I'm going to budget less, but the fact is if those needs come up, we're going to spend it. The 2021 budget is still too low in current expense. The COVID, that was pre the current budget. This is the adopted budget. Okay, is currently $1.4 million in ending cash. With the COVID adjustments, it's only $634. Everything we add back to 2020 will, of course, make 2021 worse. I would also like to mention that this across-the-board cuts is an approach that is not popular. Nobody likes them. I know from talking with other people from other counties that many counties use them and have used them for years. But when you can't identify specific services to eliminate, they're kind of the only option. They are equitable if applied equally to everybody, but only if uniformly applied. I will mention briefly, we're focusing on current expense, but in other funds, grant-funded programs that get current expense support were asked for reductions, but I don't think any of them actually offered any. The land bank proposed reductions, even though revenue so far is strong. Roads has reduced spending, consistent with reduced revenue. Mental health, which of course is affected by the pandemic because it is based on sales tax, its revenue is mostly sales tax, did both propose 5% reductions. Some of the smaller funds have secure revenue. They weren't asked for projections. They don't need to cut anything. The Clearwater Utilities didn't quite get to 5%, although they did make some cuts, but they do also have secure funding. Solid Waste cut funding and, cut expenditures, it should say, They also offered to pick up some expenses from parks, to pick up parks garbage, which has happened in the past. ER&R did propose 5% reductions and also reduced some other fund spending. And the IT budget for 2021 is still under development. The 2020 budget has already been, for IT, has been developed. It's pretty certain. It's been distributed to the funds. I will say that the estimates for 2021 in the budget that you're looking at are too high because of my assumptions. It's a long story, but they are too high. The reductions are too high. The cost will be higher than is included in the budget.
Mylene, can I ask you? Mylene?
Yes?
So you're saying that the IT director who turned in his numbers, or the numbers for 2021, you're saying you don't agree with them because they're too...
No. I'm sorry. He hasn't... He's still working on 2021. Because I put the worksheets together before I had that budget, I estimated the 2021 costs to the departments and funds based on the 2020 reductions. The 2020 reductions, in addition to cutting costs, also used accumulated cash in that fund. What we don't have... we can't do that again. We've used up the accumulated cash. So the 2021 reductions to the departments will not be as high as the 2020 reductions were. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Okay. I know. It's my error. And I expect to get more final budget, 2021 budget from Tony today before he leaves on vacation. A lot of the numbers in the proposals you're going to see in this budget are estimated, particularly in the wages and benefits. This had to be put together very quickly, and we haven't done a complete position analysis for all of the personnel changes. Changes in one fund often affect other funds. I've tried to capture those secondary changes, but I'm quite certain I have missed a few. And once we get, a few top-level decisions, we will definitely have a more thorough and accurate budget put together. That is it as my introduction. Thank you, and that's it. Questions?
Mr. Stevens.
I only had one. I don't understand the IT hire. Does that mean he's there, or should I just wait till you have the 2021? Because it seems like it would be not deep enough or deeper or too deep. The reason hire, so I don't.
The reason I'm saying the costs, are we talking about reduction or are we talking about costs? Let's talk about reduction. He made a pretty deep reduction in 2021. In 2020. It cannot be that great for 2021 because part of the 2020 reduction is because we used up ending cash in IT. So that cash was distributed across the funds to increase their reduction. Now that the cash has been used up, we can't do that again in 2021. Mm-hmm. So that's why the numbers that I have as estimates, and they're all marked as estimates for 2021, they will all be greater because the reductions will be less than and that was my error, not Tony's.
Okay.
Mr. Watson.
No questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Mylene, anything else?
Nope.
Mike, do you have any comments for Mylene? At this point?
Not at this time. It was good overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Mylene. All right, so back to our departmental budget revisions. My apology for missing the auditor's summary. Mr. Borman, are you available to start?
I am.
Please begin.
All right. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So I'll get through this pretty quickly, recognizing that you're under time constraint. I just wanted to throw this up there because I think it's important for everybody to recognize that our department does two basic things. One is conserve land. You can see the mission. It's all about that. The second is stewarding the property that we already have. So this is just a slide of our accomplishments and a few of the things that we've actually done recently. And so you can just take note of that. But the bottom line is we have 25 preserves open to the public, and that's a big piece of what we have to spend on managing properties. Don't need to go into that. Just wanted to point out that we are limited, our administrative costs are limited by our ordinance to 10% of revenue. And we've stayed within that over the life of the program. Also for acquisition work, we've done we've spent a lot of time raising additional funds to stretch county dollars further. So here's our organizational chart. It may not look flat, but it really is. And you can see that on the left-hand side, with our office manager and outreach coordinator and myself, we've got basically 1.9 FTE that are in the conservation area fund. Everybody else is in the stewardship fund. And I'll just note that we've got that one field assistant position that is currently vacant, and we're proposing to keep that vacant at least through the end of summer, probably into fall. The excise tax obviously is our main source of revenue, so this is where we are to this point in the year. Obviously, June was a good month. It really seems like, people are buying and selling real estate. From what we're hearing, inventory seems to be the big limiting factor here, not lack of demand. So it continues on. And our projections indicate the low projection puts us at about 3.1. Which is over our budget. We budgeted $3 million for REIT revenue. Moving into the conservation area fund, and I'll just note that the spreadsheets that Mylene sent out Friday afternoon may be a little bit different than this, but basically it's pretty consistent. The important thing here is to note that we've got a significant amount of cash, and we're projecting to have more. We're going to be bringing in more state grants, so should end up with over $4 million basically in cash. The Land Bank Commission's really tried to make a commitment to be as conservative as they can, anticipating downturns in REIT, of keeping $3 million in cash in the conservation area fund, which gives us roughly 2 years of operating costs. So we're way over that, which gives us some flexibility, but I'll just continue on with what we're proposing. Not a whole lot here. There's a couple of mistakes. The outreach coordinator is actually at 0.4 in the conservation area fund and 0.4 in the stewardship fund. And so this is the big proposal we're making to cut expenditures in the conservation area fund, given that it's really pretty tight And also, given the fact that ordinarily a big piece of the Conservation Area Fund budget would be in acquisitions, and we really don't have much in the way of acquisitions in this budget. So ordinarily, if we were faced with a budget cut, we would cut acquisitions, but we don't really have the opportunity to do that here. And I'll get into some of that in a little bit. But what we're proposing instead basically is to reduce our transfers to stewardship. We've been putting $500,000 annually into a stewardship endowment. So this is the easiest thing for us to cut, basically, out of the Conservation Area Fund. And I'll stop there and see if you have any questions about the Conservation Area Fund.
Mr. Stevens?
No, I don't have any.
Mr. Watson?
No, I don't have any.
And I'm fine, Lincoln. You can continue.
Okay. So I'll just move on. You can see our debt service there. None of that really matters in this conversation, honestly. But getting into the stewardship and management budget, as I mentioned, we do have, this is just our revenue, moving into our administration costs for stewardship and management. You can see we do have that one field assistant 2 position, and that number is reduced because that's been vacant since April. We're talking about extending that, but we would like to fill that position before the end of the year, at least at this point in time. We also had another field assistant who went out on family leave, so we had a little bit of savings there. But that's all we're proposing in terms of staff. And note again, the outreach coordinator, that should be 0.4 in stewardship, not 0.8. The main cuts we're proposing really take you down to capital improvements, where we bump those numbers up really in anticipation of needing to do a few things. And so this is really ratcheting them back down again. And I want to get into what that means. And predominantly this is capital improvements for San Juan Island. And taking those numbers down. A couple of missing things before I get into this, which I think really are going to require us to revisit this whole concept of what we're doing here. One is that part of the money that we've saved on not having a field assistant, we have spent employing park staff to do maintenance, particularly on San Juan. So I'm not sure how to handle that, but that's certainly something we're open to doing. Another piece of this to consider is that if we're going to knock down these capital improvement costs, a number of these are things like parking areas, infrastructure that we were planning to use Public Works to do, and we're still open to doing that. But just to point out that if we reduce the expenditure, it will reduce revenue going to Public Works. So,
can I ask a question? Because you've lost me. On my spreadsheet, and what I see up on the screen is 0 capital improvements for San Juan, and I see site enhancement totals that don't add up with the items that are in the columns, and I don't know what asterisk 1, asterisk 2, 3, 4, and 5 refer to. So that I'm just not seeing it. So if you can help me figure that out, it'd be great.
So if I'm looking at line 167.
Okay.
And what we had proposed in our first amended budget for capital improvements in San Juan and site enhancement was $175,000.
Okay.
And so if you follow that column, the columns to the right where you get to department manager, that's what we're proposing to reduce it to.
Sorry, you can just continue on. The answer to my question was when I pulled up the tab, it went to the bottom of the page instead of the top.
Okay.
So I'm back on track. Thank you.
Great. So just to look at some of the Conservation Area Fund impacts, and I think we kind of got caught flat-footed a little bit, not because we weren't planning accurately, but just because our funding and our projects are really cyclical in nature. So we'd had some on San Juan Island that we'd passed on, that the Land Bank Commission had decided we really couldn't afford at the time. If you look up at Katy Mountain, there are a couple of those up there, which are significant expenditures. Obviously, we won't be pursuing those at this point in time. By Mount Grant, there's a significant one also, which is still under consideration. That's the Hauschka property, but we'll just have to come back to all of that at a later point. One thing that is not in the budget, which I think is really pretty critical that we need to add back in, is that Beaverton access piece. That's acquiring the property that would allow us to connect the preserve to the athletic fields. So that's something that's not budgeted, but probably we should come back to. Also, on Orcas, this is how the Haida Point acquisition has shaped up, where the 3 parcels to the south are actually going to go to the Lummi, but we will end up with the 2 parcels to the north. We already have $25,000 in escrow. I think our total cost is going to be $15,000. And again, it's a donation, so it's not much of a budgeted item, but we haven't taken care of that $15,000, even though we're basically slated to get a refund at this point from the money that we have in escrow. And on Lopez, we do have a few things brewing. One, the Robinson Conservation Easement on the left-hand side. You can see that's one where we've applied for a salmon recovery grant. We don't know the status of the grant. The project is dependent on getting that grant, and it may be, if we're successful, that expenditure would not be made this year. But I just wanted to put it on your radar screen as something that is not in the budget. Davis Bay Farm, that's one I pulled from our first amended budget request out of deference to the situation, thinking let's hold off for a bit rather than going forward with this acquisition. But it is something we've been working on quite a bit. We do have a partnership with the Preservation Trust to acquire that 21-acre parcel. And another one, the Smith property next to Lopez Hill, that's something the Lopez Community Land Trust has closed on. We've been looking at partnering with them together with the trust. That $300,000 would be our share of that partnership. That's not for this year, that's for 2021, but I just wanted to put it on your radar screen. As far as stewardship fund impacts, the big ones really are on San Juan, starting with Zylstra Lake, where we're looking at trying to open the preserve in the fall. We still do not have a parking area. We still have not done significant improvement to trails. If we go forward with this budget as it's written, probably we'll have to defer opening to next year at the earliest. Same thing on Mount Grant. We've really been looking to find a solution to our difficulties with our neighbor and wanting to improve the parking areas there. In this budget, those are dropped. So basically, we would continue in the same situation, which has not been optimal, to say the least. The next thing we would turn to would be public access planning for Beaverton Marsh, which is going to be a big project, especially given that it's so close to Friday Harbor. But we'd really have to pull back on that, as well as any kind of public access planning on Katy Mountain, which would be next in line. On Orcas, a few of the things that we really have to scale back. Judd Cove, doing a stormwater retrofit there. We've had a long-standing problem we've been hoping to correct. I don't think we'd be able to do that in this budget. Fowler's Pond, we've got issues with the dam there that we need to take care of. That would have to be deferred. And then, of course, Kaufelt Farm, where we've been putting significant amounts of money into farm infrastructure for things like heavy use areas, additional housing for farm workers, soil amendments, all that kind of thing. Partly we're just totally committed to those. We have a cost share for some of those projects with the conservation district, so that's staying. But we really have to look hard at what else we're going to invest there, including the question of doing trail planning and really completing that project that we would like to complete of putting a trail basically around the perimeter of Kaufelt Farm. So those are what you're looking at in terms of cuts. And I will stop there and take questions.
Ms. Stevens? Jamie, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I couldn't find my unmute. No, I don't have any questions.
Thanks. Mr. Watson?
No questions. Thank you, Lincoln.
And none for me either. Mike, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you. So, Lincoln, I understand the cuts. I'm trying to resolve the cuts with your fund balance. It seems like with the size of your fund balance, you could perhaps do some of the projects that you just went through for San Juan Island at least. So you just want to preserve as much cash as possible, or it seems like you have money to do some of those projects, so I'm trying to understand the cutback on the capital side.
Yeah, we're just looking for ways to basically act in unison with the rest of the county. I think that some of these things just don't apply to us very easily. So I would really advise that we revisit some of these questions. And obviously, whatever's done, it needs to go to the commission, Land Bank Commission, for them to sign off on before it comes back to you all. So we still have to have a lot of those conversations.
Great, thank you.
All right. Is there anything else, Lincoln?
Nope, that's it for me.
Thank you for your efforts on this. I appreciate the work that you've done. Thank you. Mr. Gaylord, are you on the phone or on the call?
Yes, I am.
And
Thank you.
Are you ready to begin?
I am ready, yes.
All right.
Do you see me here on the screen? I'm ready to go.
Excellent. Please begin.
Thank you, council members, for the opportunity to provide you with some information about the prosecutor's office and our approach to revisions to the budget and revised estimates of revenue and expenditures. We've made a point to look at both revenue and expenditure side of the equation in order to meet the obligation and the objective that you had. And we have two proposals to submit to you, one of which involves tapping into other more stable sources of funding on a billing basis from the prosecuting attorney's office for a portion of additional revenue. And the second approach results in loss of personnel, which we highly recommend against. We believe that regardless of the COVID emergency that's created here and the budget downturn that may occur, that the need for legal services remains stable, unchanged, and it's against public interest and bad policy to reduce the personnel of the prosecutor's office at all. We've given you a narrative that explains some of the rationale behind those kind of statements and why we think what we do, and it looks at not only at the revenue side of things, the powers of the county council to tap into other funding sources, the history of providing public safety sales tax and other revenue items that are specifically called out to benefit the prosecuting attorney's office as well as other public safety offices. And this is a time where you've saved money for this rainy day, so to speak, and it may be time to tap into that. Well, if I could, I'll start with an overview of the office by looking at our org chart, and I'm going to share the screen at this point in time.
Nothing's up yet, Mr. Gaylord.
How's that look?
Perfect, thank you.
Do you now see an organizational chart of the prosecuting attorney coroner's office?
Yes.
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 Okay. This was provided in the packet that I gave to you last week. It's Exhibit B. And this shows what the organization of the office for the years 2020 and 2021. And the dates underneath each position shows the date that that position first received approval from the county council. And so, of course, the elected prosecutors, since the time of establishment as a county and the Constitution of the state of Washington established that position, and so on. What you see here is divided on the left side and the right side. And on the left side, you see the civil function of the office. On the right side, you see the criminal function. And cross between the two, you see this overlay of the coroner function, because, of course, the elected prosecutor in small counties in Washington state also serves as the ex officio coroner. And we have to divide that work up among the people in the prosecuting attorney's office. And so we do that by assigning certain people that job, people that have the aptitude, the desire, the ability to do that work. I have a few comments about this. The outside counsel is this oblong thing up here. You're aware of that. Outside counsel assists on a variety of things. Sometimes they're funded by the a portion is funded by the risk pool, a portion is not. All of our criminal appeals use outside counsel by coordinating with a Kitsap County deputy prosecutor on a flat rate fee for those appeals. It's very efficient, gives us top talent, people who are most accustomed to criminal appeals. And we also do civil appeals from time to time with outside counsel or assist with outside counsel. And rarely we use outside counsel to assist on transactions. Try to keep most of those in-house. We also have a summer intern, which will be discussed in more detail when we talk about cuts, at least the budgeting for that. Over here on the left side, you see child support. And for years, the child support function was a 100% grant reimbursement program to San Juan County. And we last year, the year before, we broke that off into a coordinated regional program. So now that is provided 100% by Skagit County. The attorney, however, and the legal assistance provided, or the attorney is appointed by me as a deputy prosecutor of San Juan County. But for budget purposes, you can disregard the child support activities because there's nobody, all those people work in Skagit County. On the victim services on the right side, you see the green, and they're green because last year we were successful with obtaining new VOCA grants to virtually provide 100% funding for victim services, subject to additional money provided by the levy as specified in the levy that was adopted last year as to an amount that pays for the match for those grants. So there's virtually no adjustment to that work. And the other thing I should say is that when we talk about work in our office, it's not possible for us to assign these advocates any work down here of these lawyers here in the middle and their staff. And that's because they are under grants which prohibit them doing that work. And we are asked questions about the policies. We have written policies in place that prohibit us from doing that. They're well aware of that. About the most we can do is ask them to catch our phones when everybody's sick on the same day. So that leaves us with these core positions that existed anywhere from 40 years ago until a decade ago. And they include the 2 attorneys handling criminal cases. One is assigned for felony cases, the other for misdemeanor cases. We have about 70 felony cases a year, a steady increase over the last couple of years. We showed you in the charts in our narrative. And misdemeanors are staying steady as well, although and if you looked at that chart carefully, you'd see that the number of DUIs is increasing, and those are probably the most work kind of misdemeanor that there is. Those are very specialized kind of cases, and unfortunately for San Juan County, those have been on the increase over the last few years. Each of these positions have a good amount of court time, daily now, and additional court time now that we have full-time judges, nearly full-time judges, and in the case of district court, and in COVID time, people are being spread out for court hearings over a longer period of time, which means more hearing time for those attorneys, and they can't be in their office doing paperwork at the same time. So that is why the legal assistant and attorney ratio is like it is, and absolutely essential and consistent with legal assistant attorney ratio across the state. On the civil side, you know the work that we do. We defend lawsuits. We advise on legal matters prior to lawsuits. We do legal review of policies, procedures, ordinances. We advise on contracts. You just heard Lincoln Borman talk about grants, transactions that he was talking about. Well, any grant, and this whole discussion over the next 2 weeks, when you hear from other elected officials and department heads, and they talk about a grant, if they talk about a contract, if they talk about a project, you should know that that involves legal work. And unless they are telling you they're going to cancel grants, contracts, projects, there will be no reduction in the work of the prosecuting attorney on the civil side. So the only way to do that is to listen to them tell you that they are going to be canceling those things. On the civil side, we do civil code enforcement on both the health side and the land use side. And, of course, we defend all those decisions, as I've talked to you about before. Very little of our work is optional, and neither are the deadlines. We advise on public records. And in the next year, the thing to be keeping in mind is the next year. And starting in December, we will be meeting with the Charter Review Commission. And for the first 6 or 7 months of next year, there will be weekly or more often or less, whatever. There'll be meetings. And the Charter Review Commission is a significant amount of work on the civil side that can't be ignored, and will be coming along, and we'll have to get ready for that. So that's how the work is organized. Let me talk briefly about the 2 options that we've proposed to you. Now, I include this material here at the top just because our budget is confusing, because you see so much duplication. And that's because the state auditor has asked for 2 line items, one for attorney advice and another for attorney litigation. We used to have 1 line item for all these things. And so we had to break them up, and a lot of things were split in half, and so you see duplication, 2 amounts, half of what the total is. So to eliminate all that duplication, I just made this list of reductions or increases in revenue and added them up for you. Here they are. Option 1. Option 1 addresses increased revenue that you will see from the estimate that has previously been provided to date from the share of the prosecuting attorney's salary. The prosecuting attorney's salary is set by statute. There was an estimate of how much the state would supply. That estimate was about $7,600 low. There'll be new revenue coming in by the end of the year in that amount. The second amount is to go back to a process that was in place in terms of new revenue is for $30,000 this year, $60,000 next year, to increase billing of the land bank and road funds, independent funds, different places, and we discontinued that billing because that billing had to be done on an hourly basis. We're working now. I'm talking with state auditor's office in order to obtain guidance on how to resume that. I've spoken with attorneys across the state who are using this same practice, and there's no question this is a solid, well-established practice, usually used in medium to large-sized counties, less often in small-sized counties just because there's a certain amount of effort that goes into the billing practice. We used to bill on kind of a retainer basis, and we were told we couldn't do that, so we'd have to bill hourly now and submit bills monthly and so on, which is takes some time. So the other part here deals with reductions. And there'll be a reduction because I won't ask for a COLA on the local portion of the PA's salary. The summer intern program did not get going this year due to COVID, so we missed that. We can put that back into the budget. We are traveling less or attending fewer trainings, or trainings are provided. Some trainings are provided to us at no charge, so we expect loss of need to pay for trainings. We'll reduce the criminal investigator position. That will depend upon need. I'll come back to you if we need it. We'll reduce training for advice services. That's where we travel to other counties. There's such a big increase now on using Skype and Zoom and various different kind of meetings. There's less travel that we anticipate. There's a furniture item in there that we can hold back on and get by for the next year. We're hoping to have no loss of personnel, so we can reduce advertisement for $500, reduce operating rentals $200. That's always typical. I'm not even sure why it's there. And we will strive to reduce outside counsel claims and litigation for a total of $3,000. That gets us to $60,000, and that's about 87% of the 5% goal. Now, if you insist upon 100% of the 5% goal, we go to the next option 2, and this results in a loss of a position. And the loss of position also means payment of a separation payments that are incidental to that position this year. But I've determined that there's only one way to meet that, and that is to eliminate the position. It'll be actually way more than 5%. And so what we would do is put the money back into the extra would be put back into outside counsel. Because if the position is eliminated, we'll have a greater need for use of outside counsel, probably on civil items. So we'll have to deal with that. So as I mentioned, there's these items here, a payout for the separation based upon employment contracts and so on, and the difference to be applied to outside counsel. Mylene said that we should not count, and I did not count those items that are covered by other costs, but I just wanted to monetize those and show you what the amount is. The amount is $28,272. Some of that's based upon my estimates. So those are the 2 proposals I have, and I'm asking that if you choose an option or ask me to implement an option, it'd be option 1, not option 2, and that's what I have. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, do you have any questions?
So really, all your option one, 50% of your savings is really just charging other departments, right?
That is correct, yes.
And in the way you edit your comment on option two, I just want to be clear about on that is, I'm not sure, when you were saying, how do I say this? You were saying if you had to eliminate a position, the downside would be the payout plus the work's still there, so you'd have to contract out for it. So does that end up in a net savings, or?
Well, no. I don't know, because the money would be put into outside counsel, and we just have to wait and see what happens and what the demand would be for the work. So far, I see no loss of demand for work, and in general, I wouldn't expect it.
Okay, that's why I was just trying to be clear on what the downside of the options, the impact.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's all.
Mr. Watson?
Yeah, thank you, Randy. So have we started to see an uptick in drug cases?
Most certainly, yes. There's been a decided uptick in drug cases. And it's a result of the drug dog, the dog that's able to sniff vehicles and provide cause to complete a search. So, yes, there has been an uptick in drug cases, most certainly.
All right. And then on your furlough, so is it my understanding that you have volunteered yourself for furlough days?
No, I have not.
All right. So the furlough days was the rest of your staff?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Great. All right. Those are my questions.
Mr. Gaylord, a quick question following up on the furlough question. So does that mean you're not planning on doing any furloughs?
No, I'm not planning to do furloughs. What I'm planning to do is not take the local share of the salary increase.
Can you explain that to me? So that's what the state pays for your part of your...
No. It is what the Salary Commission, the local Citizens Salary Commission for San Juan County, sets the salary. And it's always anticipated that they will provide a COLA 1 year, and they typically provide a COLA every year, about 2% of the local share. And so the budget included a portion for that.
Got it.
And so that can be removed from the budget.
Just confirmation. So has the Citizens Salary Commission met yet and said there is a COLA for the future, or you're just assuming they would, and so you're offering that up?
I'm offering it up because it was in the estimate of expenses and the appropriation made. But the Salary Commission did meet, and they deferred any action until their next meeting.
Got it. Okay. And then one real quick question, because I think you and I think maybe Judge Loring are the two that are partially funded by the state, or at least I know you're partially funded by the state. The governor did a proclamation of the required furloughs through most departments. Does that play into statewide prosecuting attorney?
No, it does not.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I have no other questions. Mr. Thomas, do you have any questions?
It's not really a monetary question. It's more of a workload question. So from a staff perspective, we really monopolize the civil time of your folks. So just wondering if you've looked at the internal work allocation amongst your attorneys to potentially lighten up some of the workload that's being expressed on both Amy and John at this time.
Yeah, John and I met last week, and he's handed off a couple of projects to me to complete. We have been in touch about the workload. The work of Dr. James has been handed off to Amy Vera for this week, and I can tell you both John and Amy have expressed that Dr. James is a client that requires a lot of work, and there's a there's
something in my throat.
and so that's been a big drain on the. I'll be honest with you, it's been a big drain on the office. It was unanticipated, and the person who feels the effect most are those of other departments who have their work deferred or delayed, because there's a certain sense of urgency that's created with that work, of course, and we believe that that meets your priorities as well.
Great, thank you.
One other question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So, Randy, do we have a backlog of land use enforcement?
We do have a case, one or two cases that are pending being charged, and we're looking for that window of time when we can charge and complete it.
That's a very good lawyerese kind of answer. So I take that as a simple yes, there's a backlog of cases.
That is correct.
Okay.
All righty. Well, thank you.
I've got one other question too, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
Please.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, I just wrote down, if I get the wording wrong, but something that Mylene said about our 5% request is that it should be, it works if it's equitable and uniform. And I just have to say out loud, and I'm probably going to have a comment on other people's too, it doesn't seem like this is equitable and uniform. It's just shifting the shells.
Well, I wouldn't call it shifting the shells. I think what you need to do is think of your organization and what's the way to accomplish your goals and satisfy your risk and get done what you want to do for the next year, and look at it from that perspective. The other thing is to look at where the reduction in money is actually going to be and reduce the programs where the money is going to be lost. There is very little loss of money of the kind of revenue that comes to the prosecuting attorney. As stated by Mylene in the outset, property taxes are stable. Property taxes provide the main source of income to the prosecuting attorney's office. The public safety sales tax was promoted to the public to say we want stability in the prosecuting attorney's office and other offices. Wow. And that's going to just be down at the most 20%, and we know it's gone up almost doubled since the public safety sales tax was started. So if you look at what the public demands in terms of public safety, and you look at what you demand in terms of civil work, keeping the office of the prosecuting attorney intact is the best thing you can do.
I'll just say I agree with your first part, that we do have to look at this across the board as what's best for the organization. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Is there anything else for Mr. Gaylord? All right. Thank you, Mr. Gaylord, for your time and efforts towards this process. Brendan, Brendan Cowan. Oh, and by the way, just if possible, and as you come back on to work on your presentation, if you could please state your name and the department you are representing and in your position. Mr. Cowan, are you available?
I am. I'm on the line, counsel. Thank you. Good morning. I just tried to pull up my screen. Let's see if this works.
And Brendan, name and title.
Can you hear me?
Yes, just please, for the record, identify yourself for those listening.
Sure, yeah. Brendan Cowan, Department of Emergency Management Director for both the county and the town of Friday Harbor. And can you see the first slide of my presentation?
We're working on it. Hold on.
Okay.
There we go.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you.
Hopefully, we'll be able to catch up on your schedule a little bit because, as you're well aware, my department is not a very big one and my budget is not a very big one. So we'll try to keep this very simple and should be able to move through this very quickly. First example of that is here's my org chart. It's myself working 3/4 time here on San Juan Island, and Dave Halloran, who works 1/4 time over on Orcas Island. Dave and I have been working together for something more than 15 years. The arrangement between us on each island is a real advantage to our operation and always has been. It gives us better coverage, and it lets us cover for one another while we're away or otherwise occupied. A good example of that was this past weekend. We took a marine oil spill call from Department of Ecology and Coast Guard on Orcas Island. I took the initial call, was able to work with Dave. He was able to go out pretty quickly and put eyes on the incident and then report that back to Coast Guard and Ecology. We do that sort of thing fairly regularly. Obviously not nearly as regularly as the Sheriff's Office or some of the other emergency response agencies in the county. But one or the both of us are on call pretty much 24/7 and have been for just about all of those 15 years. So similar to other budget presentations, I just like to present a general list of what we do. I'm not going to go through it, but I will say often in my budget presentations, I try to convey the way in which the Emergency Management Department is like insurance, or it's like a fire sprinkler system in a building in which it's worth investing in. It's important to the long-term viability of the organization, but we also hope that we never need to use it. Also, as all of you are aware, over the last 6 months, we have very much had to use it. And I like to think that we've done a very good job and have demonstrated pretty clearly for a number of folks in the community at large that all the work we've done in preparation and training and being able to support partner agencies in the event of crisis has been well placed and has certainly benefited the county overall. Not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but we think we've shown our value in recent months. The budget revision assignment from the auditor was to reduce our overall expenses for 2020 by 5%. So that equates to a 10% reduction for the third and fourth quarter, as here we are at the midpoint of July. My adopted 2020 budget from county funds is just over $132,000. That does not include a $15,000 contribution from the town of Friday Harbor. The county portion of my budget is 100% funded by the property tax levy that was renewed at the end of last year. So 5% of that is $6,621. So that's my task, is to eliminate that from my budget. Here's just a quick look at my budget. It's not very complicated, especially compared to the ones you've looked at previously this morning. The lines highlighted in that cream color are ones that are not touchable. There has been some reduction in IT, GIS. Those are not included in these calculations. The model I'm looking at for this is basically eliminating all of my M&O funding for the remainder of 2020. That sounds dramatic, but it's only about $1,300. And then making adjustments to personnel costs for both myself and Dave through the end of 2020 to make up the balance. So nothing too complicated going on here. My budget has always been pretty lean, personnel costs, and then a little bit of M&O. So that's how we get to our total amount. We're moving quickly here. So there's a summary of that. Elimination of all M&O and a reduction of staff time by approximately 8% for the remainder of 2020. And that's shared equally between Dave and I. What that means in practical terms is about another 2.0 furlough days per month for myself. And that's on top of the already scheduled 1.0 furlough days. And for Dave, it's basically the same thing. It's not actually furlough days. It's a reduction in FTE because Dave is a representative employee. And I recognize that would need some discussion and review with the union. And then just basically all elimination of all of our M&O expenses. And obviously things like travel, preparedness, education, a lot of those things have been on hold so far in 2020. And as much as I wish that we'd be getting back to regular business before the end of the year, certainly it wouldn't surprise me if we did not. Realistically, those M&O expenses are not a huge hit for us in terms of our ability to get our work done, but it's not insignificant either. What does this actually mean for us going forward? I think that a lot of this is going to depend on how the COVID situation evolves. If the COVID situation simmers down to some extent and we have a quiet fall, I think both Dave and I, although obviously we hate to see our jobs reduced in any way, might look at these furlough days as a welcome chance to take a break from work that really neither of us have taken over the last 6 months. But if the COVID situation continues as is or intensifies, as is certainly a possibility, I think Dave and I will look at these furlough days as unpaid volunteer time working for the county. 2 days isn't a lot in the overall scheme of things. Well, 3 days with the already scheduled 1 day. But it's not insignificant, the pace we've been operating and the roles we've been playing. So we'll just kind of see how that unfolds. I want to highlight that my hope is that this exercise and potential need for actually activating this exercise does not become a competition between county departments. My preference would be that it's spread evenly between all departments and that everyone shares the load, and that includes department heads and elected officials and every piece of the puzzle within the organization. Recognizing that some departments' funding streams are more or less untouched by any revenue shortfalls, and that affects those decisions. But I like the idea of things being equal. That said, I just want to take a look at the DEM budget over the last few years. So going back to 2014, our staffing hours overall have been reduced by 10%. 26 total departments in the county. We're one of 4 who've declined over that time frame. 3 were flat, and then 19 increased. The total overall increase in county payroll over that same time frame is about almost 14%. So no one's going to accuse us of empire building over the last 6 years, and even going back longer than that, we've consistently been trimming our operation. And from 2010 over the last decade to this year, our M&O budget, while never robust, has declined significantly from $4,200 back in 2010 to $1,300 now. So I just want to throw that in there to give a picture of what we're doing. I think philosophically, I've always made an effort to keep things as simple as possible, recognizing that we are an insurance and that there's a lot of other work in the county that sort of becomes day-to-day important. And realistically, we've been able to fill in some of the gaps with grant funding that's come in over the years, and hopefully that will continue to some degree, although we're already hearing rumors that that funding stream might change going forward, and it's certainly been reduced quite a bit from 10 years ago. So that's the end. Happy to answer any questions that any of you have. Like to think that was a pretty straightforward explanation of where we're at.
Mr. Stevens, any comments?
No, I appreciate your comments, Brendan, about being equal and uniform across the county to make this, even though some funding streams may be stable, it's an across the county problem, the lack of revenue overall. Thanks.
Mr. Watson?
Yeah, no questions. Thanks, Brendan.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, hey, Brendan, Mike. So thinking about the state's pending budget crunch and thinking about the state military department and the grants they provide, any intel you have on what might happen to their budget?
Well, here's what I think might happen, and there's a lot of work happening at the local level in emergency management to try to prevent this or at least steer it. And almost all of our funding that comes through comes from the federal side to the state, and then the state distributes it out to the locals. And for all of that funding, the state takes a sizable cut before it comes down to the locals. And we don't have any actual say in how large that cut is. And it's been sort of a political relationship-driven balance over the years. But my sense is that we're going to see the state taking a much larger cut than they ever have before. I know the military department is under a lot of pressure from the governor and the legislature and folks on the funding side at the state to shift the balance even more in the state's favor. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I haven't heard anything about the federal funding stream. It has been reducing slowly over the years, and certainly one need not be a fortune teller to think that we might see more drastic reductions going forward.
So maybe the funding allocation, if you will, should be on our legislative agenda.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I'm sure that I'm not the only organization that is going to be facing that same issue. I'm quite sure the health department will, and likely others as well.
Great, thank you.
Brendan, thank you as well. I appreciate the work you put in, and I do appreciate the fact that you took a really solid stab, even with the small budget, to address the cost requests that we had. So thank you very much for that. All right. So it is now, Council, it is now 10:50. Do you want to take a quick break or keep going? Bill, Jamie?
Okay.
I'm okay.
I'm okay.
All right. Our next item is the treasurer. Rhonda, are you on? Are you able to speak at this point?
I am.
Okay.
I'm
I apologize for being late, but thank you.
Yes, thank you. Rhonda Peterson, County Treasurer, and I will, like Brendan, I have a small budget, and we'll try to get through this pretty quickly so we can try to get us back on track. So I just wanted to start out a little bit and talk about, I've talked with council before that our office had cut staff back in 2009, and since I've been treasurer, after the first year, I had a couple people retire, and I restructured the office and have worked really hard at trying to find ways to be more efficient, so I wouldn't have to come back to council to ask for that position to be reinstated. So we've been maintaining with our current staff, and at this time I don't see how we could cut any more staff and still keep up with our daily mandated duties. So like I said, I continue to look for ways to be more efficient. In looking at how we do business, some of the ways we can be more efficient, I've been working on an import process with recording electronic real estate excise tax affidavits. With our office being closed to the public, we've had an increase with our submissions of online e-rates. Both the title companies now use it exclusively, and with that increase, we obviously our workload has increased. So currently, when we receive those documents, we're manually entering those into our software, which is PAX. So I reached out to PAX to see if I could get an estimate for a system that we could import that process instead of us manually entering it in. And the estimate I received from them was, and this includes tax, it's $14,756. And The annual maintenance fee is $1,736, and that also includes tax. So the one-time fee is $13,020, and then the annual would be the $1,736. And the treasurer has funds from the REIT that we collect to cover those costs, and that's currently in the treasurer's trust fund that we can transfer over for that. I thought I would share just my budget worksheet here and go over the reductions. I'm not sure if you can see this.
Yep, see it.
Okay. So what I did was reduced any of the office supplies. This is just the reductions for 20. I wrote on the side here this is the amount that I would be reducing, and then this is the difference of the reduction. And so reducing the office supplies, we've already mailed out our property tax statements this year, so our cost was $11,700, so that's a reduction of $3,300. And then next year I'm anticipating about $12,000 in 2021. We send a lot of our tax statements out through e-notices, which is an electronic tax statement. So the more people that sign up with that, it costs us less to send those notices out than it does to send them through the mail. LexisNexis I've cut, which is for using for foreclosures or finding people for addresses when we get return tax statements. We've used that in the past. We've cut that out completely, so that's a savings of $700. I've cut all outside travel and for this year, and then next year I kept in just a little bit because having a new chief deputy, there might be some training that would be involved, and we just don't know where things are going to be at really in 2021. So, and then professional dues, cut the conference. I left a little bit in for this year just because there is a conference that's later this year, and it's a virtual conference, but they are charging a fee for it, but they have reduced their fee for it. And then cutting any insecurities for any accrued interest or any premiums, I've cut those, and will just work on buying everything at par as I can. And I was able to get to the 5% reduction for both 20 and 21. And then also the Treasurer's Trust Fund. Is there any questions on the current expense fund before I move to the Treasurer's O&M fund?
Jamie?
No.
Bill?
No questions. Okay. So then the Treasurer's O&M fund is, it basically funds itself. So if we don't have any of the foreclosure fees that we expend, we're able to recoup that because we charge the property owner. Those foreclosure fees are added onto their property tax statements. So I did reduce some of to get to the 5%, I did reduce some of the things for this year and next year, thinking that we might not go out. I typically budget for 4 foreclosures a year, and probably will not happen this year, so I just reduced the budget a little bit for the title search reports and some travel and training in this fund as well. And this year is a new legislation where we have to print and mail out postcards, which we sent out after the April payment was missed, and we add a fee onto that. We get charged for it, but then we also add a fee back onto the taxpayer to cover that cost. That's all I have.
Ms. Stevens?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Watson?
Yeah, Rhonda, thanks. So have we seen a increase in delinquency so far this year?
Actually, well, we haven't. We're pretty much on target like we have been as last year. we sent out postcard reminders. So this is the first year we've had to do it. There was about 1,700 properties that were in foreclosure, or not in foreclosure, but they were delinquent in making their current 20-year taxes. But, by sending out those reminder notices, we noticed that a lot of people that were delinquent wound up paying taxes from previous years, like maybe a lot of the personal property taxes weren't paid in 2019, and by getting that postcard reminder notice, they wound up paying that and their current year. So it kind of brought us up to date a little bit more with, catching up on prior years' property taxes. So I haven't seen any increase at this point, and we're actually, like as Mylene had said, we're on target with property tax collection.
Do we have any foreclosures in process?
Not at this time. We haven't been able to get working on them as closely as we'd like to, just because of the pandemic. We've been busy dealing with a lot of different issues with that.
So how many would be qualified for foreclosure?
I don't have a current list of that. I can get that for you, though, if you'd like it. We're generally we usually start out the year between, I would say, 1,500, and then we reduce it down to generally 0 by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Rhonda, real quick, what was the 5% number you were supposed to hit?
21,000.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. The next topic is council. Ingrid, are you going to present that for us?
I would, but because of the limitations on time in the court, may I go later and let you catch up with Superior Court?
Perfect. Judge Loring, are you on the phone?
I am. Thank you.
Great. Hold on one second. So, counsel, just FYI, we're going to, in order to meet a time-sensitive nature for the Superior Court, we're going to jump in and match their time at 11 o'clock and then go back to counsel and district court. Is that all right, Jamie and Bill?
Yep.
All right, great. Thank you. Judge Loring, thank you very much. Floor is yours.
All right, just bear with me while I share my screen here. Just a second.
You have a minute, so you're okay.
I'm not used to it. Okay. All right. Great. Sorry, let me start here. Okay. Well, good morning, and thanks for being so courteous in terms of our schedule limitations for the day. We really appreciate that. So just highlighting our mission here, obviously this hasn't changed, but just reminding in terms of our mission to provide fair, impartial, and timely decisions in an empathetic and courteous manner that promotes respect for the law, and to provide meaningful access to everyone, ensuring that parties feel heard and understand the process and the court's decisions. So this hasn't changed. We're just, like everyone, challenged to try to do it more efficiently and with fewer resources. So in looking at who were we, obviously we're still the same, but I'm showing this as sort of a before and after the current budget situation. So the Superior Court has always been lean. We did actually add the 0.4 FTE assistant position 2 budgets ago, but we still have been lean. So looking here at our org chart, I'm a full FTE. Jane, as our court administrator, is a full FTE. Linnea is our juvenile court administrator at a full FTE. And then we have had a 0.2 FTE court facilitator for the family law courthouse facilitator program. I also reference our drug court case manager, Brad Fincher, but he's an employee of district court, and he has been functioning as our drug court case manager without any additional out-of-pocket cost for Superior Court, but there is a reimbursement to district court for mental health tax. So that's just an aside. Then you see that we had legal specialist Lauren Franchosi, a 0.4 FTE. We also have had on-call bailiffs for jury trials and court reporters by contract for jury trials. So following the voluntary early retirements, our org chart now looks like this. So Jane has had the responsibility to manage our law library. There's never been an FTE associated with that responsibility, and it was simply delegated to Superior Court when the prosecutor's office wasn't able to fulfill that responsibility any longer in around 2010 or 11. But given the crunch that Jane is being imposed with now, given the loss of our part-time legal specialist position, the clerk's office is going to take on the day-to-day management of shelving books and stocking the law library, and Jane will maintain the billing and other management side of that. So I'm reflecting that change in Jane's box there. In addition, the court facilitator position was Kathy Hagan. Again, she retired. That's now vacant. The legal specialist .4 position that we've had, Lauren Franchosi, retired. That's now vacant. We didn't ask to rehire for either of those two positions. We didn't think it was feasible to do that. And we've worked really hard, as you know, with juvenile court, and juvenile court has taken on right now temporarily the courthouse facilitator position, or I should say responsibilities. And Linnea is just taking that on and delegating it as needed, just to make sure that we can maintain that critical role for our community, which is for folks who don't have attorneys, who need help with their family law matters. And right now, again, it's only 1 day per week, and usually helps about 5 to 6 people per week. So juvenile court is assisting us in helping to fulfill that role, but I'm still showing that as a vacant position because ideally in the future, we would like to have that staffed fully again. Similarly, with the legal specialist position, we're just showing that as vacant, and ideally in the future, we would hire for that again. On-call bailiffs, we still will continue to need those folks for our jury trials. There's no other way to do it. Court reporters, you're going to see as I go forward, that is one thing that we're proposing not using for the remainder of 2020, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So in looking at what can we eliminate in terms of programs or services, there are simply very little, and I should say I know and appreciate that that's the goal here. It's not to just squeeze everybody, but to rather cut programs or services where we can in terms of meeting the 5% reduction goal. Unfortunately, it's really hard for Superior Court, like many, but we have very few discretionary programs or services. So some that we do, just to mention, like drug court is discretionary, it's not required, but it has very little, if any, outside additional cost. And what cost it does have is funded through mental health tax funds and criminal justice treatment account funds. So would it make sense to cut those types of discretionary program? Again, with the courthouse facilitator I mentioned, this is discretionary. When we were here for our flat budget exercise last year, this was one that we said we could cut if we had to. That has, in effect, happened in terms of our budget because of the voluntary early retirement. But right now, Juvenile Court Services is helping us to maintain those critical services, which I feel really fortunate about that they've been able to do that, at least for the short term. That's not a permanent fix, but for right now, they're doing it, and it's awesome. So how do we get to a 5% reduction? And the 5% reduction for us was about $16,500. And I'll say as a side note, this is probably more detail than you want, but Mylene was fabulous in working with us in our worksheet, and she helped us to pull out those things in our budget that are reimbursed with mental health tax funds, because those wouldn't represent a true cut because they're reimbursed, so it wouldn't be a true budget savings. But she also helped us to take those out of our budget so that we weren't having to show a 5% cut of those programs that wouldn't benefit us, so to speak. So in my worksheet, those are the items that I've shown in blue. And I have actually noted where some of those will be decreased, just so that you know that. But those blue items and those blue reductions don't count towards our 5% reduction because they're not a true budget reduction because they're reimbursed. So we really appreciate Mylene's help, and that's what is highlighted in blue in our worksheet. But going through our worksheet, we've highlighted in yellow what we're actually proposing to cut to get to our 5% reduction.
Excuse me, Judge.
So in terms of... Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to, the part that Mylene pointed out, which could be moved to the mental health fund, what is that amount of money? I mean, while it's not necessarily a budget cut, it is a reduction on a reduction on CE requirements. So how much is that? Do you know?
Well, Mr. Chair, it would be a different calculation. So what I should have explained better was that we didn't look at making targeted reductions there because from the auditor's perspective, those weren't true reductions from a net budget perspective because they're reimbursed dollar for dollar with one of those two, mental health or CJTA. I've noted in this chart that you have our worksheet in blue where there are some of those reductions. And so I don't have a total for you. That's the short answer. I think I'm looking at 15, somewhere around 5,000 that I've shown that will be cut just naturally from those items that are reimbursed with mental health tax funds. And that's just because of lack of ability to do trainings, for drug court, a reduction in a Compass Health fee for lack of in-person hearings. So I think there's about $5,000 here showing on the blue items. But again, that's beyond what we've done from a 5% reduction because it's not a true net reduction when you consider the reimbursement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I was just academically interested in what the number was, but thank you.
Sure. And again, I think we could have even pushed those a little more aggressively, but because we know those funds are there, we chose not to do that. We actually got an extra CJTA funding this year for drug court. So we know that money's available. So I didn't push more aggressively to try to cut anything in that area.
Great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So then looking at what could we actually cut in terms of programs or services, and really the only two things in that category in terms of cuts is eliminating court reporters for the remainder of 2020. That's about a $6,000 savings because we had budgeted $12,000. We've already used $6,000 of court reporter this year, and so it would save $6,000 for the remainder of 2020. Again, we talked about this with the flat budget. We're not required to have court reporters. It is a best practice. There is certainly a concern that there could be a gap or a void in the record by recording it that we wouldn't know until a case was appealed. But this is really one of the very few areas where we feel like we can cut, and $6,000 for our total is a substantial amount. And so we did upgrade our microphone system for the purpose of recording in the last 2 years. And so we feel good that we can do that effectively, and that's one of the ways that we'll make our budget cut. The second category that would really be a cut is eliminating what we call legal appointees that are paid for at county expense for the remainder of 2020. And really what that means for us is eliminating the guardians ad litem that are paid for at county expense. Not in dependency cases. That's a different program. That's a voluntary program. So don't think about dependency cases. Rather, it's in our family law cases where if I see a family law case where there appears to be a lot of risk or conflict or concern about the well-being of the children involved, the court has a duty to appoint a guardian ad litem in certain circumstances. And if people are indigent, the county pays a part or all of the cost of that guardian ad litem. These are non-volunteer, these are professional guardians ad litem who are appointed. So essentially what we've done is account for what we've paid for to date, which is about $2,300, and we simply won't be able to pay for any more at county expense for the remainder of 2020. That would leave our budget for 21 intact, but it would mean that if folks can't afford to have a guardian ad litem appointed at their own expense, that simply won't happen for the remainder of 2020. All right. Other than those two items, which are true cuts in programs or services, the remaining items really are what I would consider the squeeze that we've talked about. So in that category, I have agreed to take an equivalent of 1 furlough day a month in salary reduction. I included in my letter that I sent to council with our materials, that judges have really been, I would say almost admonished, but certainly warned not to take voluntary salary reductions, including during these times of budget crisis, just to maintain judicial independence and to maintain the integrity of the elected judge role in Washington state. So there certainly is a concern there, but I would say in this situation, given the budget crisis that we're facing, while I most certainly respect those principles of judicial independence and adhere to those principles, I've made the personal decision that I think it's needed to take that 1 furlough day a month, including to support my staff, Court Administrator Jane Severin and Juvenile Court Administrator Lene Anderson, who are required to take those furlough days. So I've made that choice voluntarily, and I explained that, and I attached for you the Supreme Court's letter about judicial independence. In addition, and really kind of similarly from our perspective, I propose a substantial reduction for Judge Pro Tem time. And so remember that unlike, I think, a lot of other department head or elected positions, the judges have to be here. There has to be a district court judge available every day or a superior court judge available every day. So, and because we're, each a one judge superior court, likewise a one judge district court, when I'm not here, I have to arrange for a judge to be here temporarily, which we call it a judge pro tem. And so our judge pro tem budget was substantially increased the last couple of years to really acknowledge that and to provide for coverage both for vacation time and training as well as for conflict cases. So I've proposed a substantial reduction of almost $5,000 and for the remainder of the year. And that result would be essentially that I won't be able to take additional vacation or leave unless I can coordinate with Judge Jewett to cover my calendars at no additional net cost to the county. And I'll just tell you that she and I work together all the time, as I did with Judge Andrew. So we try to cover for each other whenever it's possible to do that. But for our large calendars or our big hearings, it's really not possible because we each have our own caseloads. So what she and I have informally done and will continue to do for the remainder of the year, I think, is try to schedule our time out of the office when it's not on a major hearing day so that we can cover informally for one another and not have to hire a pro tem. But that is really a substantial additional burden and something that I think I can speak for me that I'm willing to do, but it is a substantial additional burden. We've also eliminated travel and training completely and several other line item reductions. I can talk about some in supplies, some in books. And then for the law library, we have eliminated any discretionary book purchases. So that's it on the reductions that we have proposed. I'll note in our spreadsheet, you can see for Superior Court, we were short $211 of getting to our target, but we made up for that in the law library budget by reducing an additional $211. So it's a net satisfaction of the 5% reduction. And again, I mentioned in our letter, this is a 5% reduction on top of having the early retirement of Lauren Franchosi and Kathy Hagan. And again, those still remain on our books, so to speak. So we have the loss of those services, but we're still carrying that for the remainder of 2020. And we've taken these additional proposed 5% reductions on top of that. I do want to point out that because we're doing this essentially as a budget amendment, we have a few increases that I've shown in green on our worksheet, and that's all built in. So we still satisfy the 5% reduction for each year. But interpreter costs have just been much higher than anticipated, and we have no control over that. It's an essential access to justice requirement that we have interpreters when needed, but it's been higher than anticipated. So that's shown in green, and it's gone up to $5,000 each year. We also, for 21, have the increase in our AV capture contract to allow audio live streaming, which we didn't previously have. So that is an increase. And then also, when we were here in early June for our reorganization and when we were agreeing not to rehire for our lost positions, council actually approved $5,000 for some on-call or contract help for Jane when we resumed jury trials. To meet our 5% reduction, we've only taken $3,000 of that, which is showing in temporary wages in our budget worksheet. So of the $5,000, we're only including $3,000 for temporary wages for this year. But in 21, we actually proposed that go up to $8,000, again, knowing that we're going to have a big need for jury trials in 2021, and that without any part-time administrative help, it's going to be really hard for us to do that. So those are the budget increases in terms of looking at this as a budget amendment. And with that, again, just looking at where we can cut and or squeeze, we just have so few options given our very few discretionary programs that we feel like we have done all we can to get to that 5% reduction on top of those early retirements that we already faced. And, we understand how important this is. We certainly are willing to share our fair share of the load, but we really feel like we're doing that and we are stretched just as thin as we can be. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Judge, can I ask you a real quick question? What was the amount in the reduction for the 0.6? Do you recall what that amount was in savings?
Well, again, we don't get to count it as a reduction in savings because we're carrying it for 2020. So it doesn't get to show here as a reduction. It will show in 21. In our worksheet, it's two separate positions. One's a 0.2 and one's a 0.4. So it's $20,000. Excuse me. For 21, it's 21,307 reduction from the 0.4 position for 21. And for the 0.2 court facilitator, it's a reduction in 10,158 plus a small amount of benefits. So, together it's about $32,000. Well, yeah, $32,000 in wages, a small amount of benefits. But we didn't get to count or consider any of that for 2020.
No, I'm well aware. I was just interested in that amount. And then you said that the amount that you were asked for is about $16,500. Is that right?
Yes, exactly, for 2020.
2020, great. I personally, and I'll pass this on to council, but I really want to thank you for stepping forward and having leadership on this. So I think that you, both in your contributions or requests or suggestions for 2021, and then these changes here have gone above and beyond the call of duty regarding the limited budget and state requirements that you have. So thank you for your work on this. It's incredibly thorough, and I appreciate the leadership for your own team. Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, Judge, I understand in some of the CARES funding I've heard that there might be a pot of money for Superior and just particularly Superior Court and possibly District Court to help make adjustments going forward. And do you know anything about that? And what would our share be? Because anything in that front would definitely help our how we allocate cash.
Absolutely. So the Supreme Court announced that those funds would be available through the Administrative Office of the Courts on July 1st. And the application was made available on July 7th. So that was the same day that Council was considering our CARES request. And so I reached out to the Administrative Office of the Courts right away. And I've actually had a call with the Financial Director, I believe is his title. And so we are making an application, a joint application between District Court and Superior Court for a substantial chunk of the CARES funding for the courts from the state. It can only be done in a reimbursement, so it's a little bit difficult. We have to have a source to pay for the items initially, and then they're doing it as a reimbursement, which is slightly different than a county where you have your specific funds you can allocate to us also as a reimbursement, but we have more control. So in any event, I was encouraged by the Administrative Office of the Courts to apply for the funding of one of our two courtrooms for the AV upgrade. So that's a $90,000 plus item that I was encouraged to apply for. And obviously that's no guarantee, but I take that very positively that I was encouraged to apply for it. And so Judge Jewett and I worked between Friday and over the weekend on our application, and we're going to hope to finalize it later today or tomorrow to submit that application to the state. So that would be our request is for the full AV upgrade for District Court with tax. It's around $98,000. And then small items of PPE that we've already purchased, as well as some interpreter fees we've had to translate our signs, some other small items. So, we're looking at, I want to say, doing the math in my head, somewhere around $105,000 that we're requesting, and we hope to finalize that again by tomorrow. They're going to consider the very first round of allocation on Wednesday, so my goal is to have that in for consideration on Wednesday. And I've already communicated this to Mylene and to Mike Thomas, and Mylene's been great about getting grants help here to help us with anything we need to get that done. So I'm really hopeful that that will then free up, again, approximately $100,000 of CARES funding for the county to use elsewhere. I think we would likely know a week from Wednesday, but I can't tell you that for sure.
So why would you just do one court instead of both courts on the AV capture?
That was what I was encouraged to apply for from AOC. I think that they want to show essentially a matching or sharing between the county and the state level, and they have limited funds to go around. I want to say it was a little over $10 million for statewide for all courts in the state. And so, again, we are one Superior Court and one District Court in San Juan County. And so I felt like it was really positive. They were looking at funding a whole courtroom. And there's no hard and fast rule. I could ask for more, but the form itself looks at what funding your county has received for CARES and what funding your county has allocated to your courts for CARES. And so I really think they want to be showing and seeing a partnership or a matching in that sense.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Watson?
No, actually, Judge Loring, thank you very much. Your presentation answered the three questions I had prepared. So thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I know these are really hard decisions that you're tasked with making, and we appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Judge. So the next, Linnea, are you on?
I am here.
All right. You have a time constraint as well, correct?
I'm a little less on a time constraint. My hearing doesn't start until 1:15. So I'm happy to go now, or if council needs a break, I'm comfortable with that as well. So please direct me.
Why don't you go ahead and we'll just break at noon for lunch. So let's get you going so you don't have any time conflict at all.
Great, thank you. I am going to try to share my screen. I'm not particularly great at this, so bear with me. Can you see opportunities for growth?
Yes, you are. It looks great. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Okay, fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone. I understand that you've been going through a lot, so I will try to go quickly and happily answer any questions. Juvenile Court Services, we have been working really hard on creative restructuring, as Judge Loring went through with you all, and we've had conversations about our restructuring quite a bit over the last few months. Currently, Juvenile Court has 4 program areas under our umbrella right now, and those are there for you to take a look at. It's quite a balancing act, and it takes a lot of teamwork. We're a very small department, doing lots of different things. So as you can see, our trial court operations public defense screener is vacant. That happened when Bonnie Stanger took the early retirement option, and Denise Ireland has promoted from the screener position into that administrative assistant. And we are holding that public defense screener position vacant to achieve some savings. And one of the big savings is around that Denise also comes in at a lower step. She's new to the county. Bonnie, of course, was at the top step. We're expecting to see more savings in 2021, especially around benefits as well as salary, which didn't quite get captured in our budget sheet because the numbers that you see in the budget sheet are attached to Bonnie's salary, but Mylene explains that that should come in at a lower number. Also, you see a little gray area. We're currently nurturing and taking care of the courthouse facilitator program, and part of that came from restructuring. We have a lot of different programs that we're in charge of in juvenile court services, and one of the big areas is our BECA, or our early intervention services. And as you're all aware, I'm sure, the Office of Public Instruction discontinued truancy through the end of the year to help support schools and families as they're going through this chaos of the pandemic and children being home. And so that is the wiggle room that allowed us to be nimble enough to pick up the courthouse facilitator program, at least through September. And so we're tracking that to know if we can keep the courthouse facilitator program, and we're looking for signals from the state. Also with that, we had a lot of wiggle room because we received several grants. The grants all define what we can spend money on, but early in February, we worked hard to start recognizing that things were coming off the rails. And so that allowed me to achieve a $21,000, almost $22,000 of savings just from grants. Our biggest areas were trying to get money towards FTEs. So I started redirecting other planned activities that we were going to do with the grants in terms of expansion to basically just start plugging holes and surviving the year. And so that allowed me to come up with this savings that Some of those FTE costs went to the sheriff's office. Some of them were within our own department. $39, almost $4,000 went to the county manager's attorney budget. It's all county current. So from my perspective, wherever we can find allowable costs and share the burden is what I'm trying to achieve every year in our grant funding. And I heard you talk with someone else about grant funding. I serve on our finance committee for the Washington State Juvenile Administrators. And one of the things that we do is that we set our pass-through allocations. We design the funding formulas. And so we've been looking very closely at the funding formulas and are working out a plan to try to stabilize funding that goes to the juvenile court. So we are looking at deprioritizing trainings and other money that we would take off the top as our way to achieve that savings rather than trying to balance the backs on the local programs. So we're working on a 5% current expense reduction. And we were able to get to the $27,000 number largely because we were able to restructure through our grants as well as being nimble to address our program. So the big things that we're spending our money on less is travel. We're not traveling anymore. We reduced our supplies. We're looking at we've cut a lot of our training budget and professional services. So right now we are focused on, primarily for professional services, we're focused on those interpreter costs that are required. So how are we doing things differently? We've eliminated our walk-in services. We're working to create a self-help option on our juvenile court services webpage. If council recalls, we spend about 50 consultations a year with people looking for services, how to seal their records, how to file an at-risk youth petition. And so we've been working hard to create a more of a self-help option where we can reduce some of those direct service and direct people to the webpage. I no longer am traveling to Orcas or Lopez and holding office hours. We had planned this year, as the courts have launched their legal financial obligations remittance program. The plan was the screener would be traveling to Orcas and Lopez. We've cut that traveling as well. They're doing all the screening over the phone. All out-of-county travel is frozen. Probation staff are traveling less frequently, but using some virtual technology that we've never used before with the help of IT. So we're doing virtual substance screening. We walk people through a video conference and collect oral swabs, and the probation staff are having some face-to-face appointments, but most of them are being done through technology, through Duo. We've reduced our training opportunities. Like I said, we've reduced professional services with a priority towards interpreters. We've discontinued the diversion scholarship, and we've shifted our service priorities, which I kind of talked about. We're not focusing as much on early intervention at the moment, and focusing that time on courthouse facilitator and also picking up additional duties with the vacancy of the screener. So our big priority in juvenile court is keeping our staffing level where we are so we can handle those emergency responses and transportation requirements as they come up. For instance, in March, it doesn't happen very often, but we had one staff who was out sick, contagious. We had one staff who was handling hearings and then transporting a youth off island to a secure facility. And then after I had worked 9 hours, I went home, had made dinner for my family, and got a call out while that other staff was in transport on the mainland, would not be back to the island until after midnight. And then I got called out and worked an additional 22 hours for an emergency. So you see, if we go beyond that, there's the wheels would have come off our bus completely, and we wouldn't be able to make those response times. So we're trying to pick up as many other additional duties where we see lulls, like in the early intervention unit, to keep our staff busy and justifying that they're there to handle emergencies. But that is our primary focus, is that we keep us strong and mentally able to handle all the emergencies that come in. Our dependency unit, we've had a lot of conversation about the volunteer guardian ad litem program in the last few months. I'm happy to announce that it looks like that historical grant funding is fairly stable. We have wonderful applicants for the 0.25 FTE, and also we're in the negotiation phase. We've been a presumptive award recipient of an additional $25,000 to assist with FTE expenses, including a 22% indirect to the auditor's office. The public defender screening unit is vacant at this time, but we are, even with the lower court hearings, the screener has screened 139, which is right on point to be halfway at the midway of our historical averages. And so far, in the 1 month that we've had the LFO remittance program, we've screened 6 for that program. Courthouse facilitator, Judge Loring, spoke quite a bit with this, so I won't go into any detail. We're learning a lot. It's quite a fire hose, but it's very similar. When we looked at restructuring, we looked at functional group activities. And the probation counselors meet regularly with families and with youth to walk them through complex problems and legal processes. They do not give legal advice, but they walk people through the process in front of them, and they fill out complex legal documents. And so this was really a good fit. They have a lot of natural training and abilities. It's just learning basically a new title. Instead of it being Title 13, now we're learning all about Title 26. I really appreciate all of your thought and consideration over the last months. I don't envy at all the position you're in. I want you to know that we are working hard to restructure, and we're working as creatively as possible to maximize all of our different funding sources. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Linnea. Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I do. Could you clarify under your savings from grant money not captured,
Sure.
Particularly in the attorney's fees, the $39.96 reimbursed county administration for public defender?
Sure. So one of the allowable costs through our BECA grant can be defense attorney fees for any truancy, at-risk youth, or child need of services fees. We have certain things that we're on the hook for legally under Title 28 that we must provide under our memorandums of understanding with the school districts. And then at the end of every year, I look at if there's anything left over. I try to always offer that to the county manager's office to reimburse. And in years past, that number has been much higher. And so then I would also reach out for revenue sharing and have received awards in the years past. But I will tell you, with the way that we have changed our business, with the community truancy boards and our attention to early intervention, that number has been able to shrink over the years and is something that the grant award can pretty much handle for the last 2 years. And so this was another example of we handled our obligations with the school district, and then we're able to close out our grant and pay the entire amount that the county manager's office has paid out in defense attorney fees for those case types during the grant year.
So you're saying the public defender's cost is less now than it used to be?
That's correct.
Okay.
We used to get bills maybe around $10,000 or $12,000 a year for those case types, and the last few years they've dropped between $6,000 and $4,000. So this is probably our lowest year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Mr. Watson?
No questions at this time.
And I don't have any either. Thank you very much, Linnea. I appreciate your work and assistance in trying to move us forward. Thank you so much. All right. The county clerk is Lisa. Are you on? Lisa? I see you listed. Lisa, did you have a time constraint? Yeah, not hearing you, Lisa. I have you unmuted. Can you try your microphone?
Hello?
Hey.
Now we got you.
Hi, Lisa.
All right. Good. We have the same constraints, maybe not as tightly as the judge does. We have to be back in court at 1:15, but this will be really quick if you want to go ahead with me.
Yeah, please. Let's just leave your day open so there's no, we don't run any risk of interfering with your process for today. So please go ahead.
Great. So I'm Lisa Henderson, County Clerk, and I guess I want to start first, Council, with recognition that you do have some hard choices ahead, and I want to thank you in advance for your careful consideration of my proposal that I have for you today. But what we do in a nutshell is we attend all the court hearings, and Randy already spoke to the longer times we're spending in court due to COVID and just that whole task of trying to do things remotely. And in addition, we maintain all aspects of the court files from the inception of a case until long after they are concluded, and we have to keep those records in perpetuity. I also want to take a minute and recognize and commend my staff over the last few months. Since mid-March, we have been running short, and I can really relate to Linnea's little photo there of the 35th policy change photo. Our processes have been changing daily. We had to throw together a e-filing process that isn't the cleanest, but it's what we have to work with now. And because of all of these things, we've had little capacity to allow the remaining staff any downtime or time off. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen now. Because the proposal that we have is we must, let me see if I can figure out how to share the screen. So our task was a 5% reduction, and the only way to do that is that's 21,000 in 2020 and 24,000 in 2021. Clerk's office only has 17,000 of what you might call discretionary spending, and that's office supplies and those kinds of things. So the only way we have to meet this task is through personnel cuts. So that's what you see in front of you there. The suggestion is the same as I proposed in the flat budget request scenario last fall. Same thing I offered when I needed to rehire the other courtroom clerk collections position. The proposal cuts training, travel, equipment purchases. The labor cost in 2020, we'll have to cut the archivist position as soon as possible. And with that, that only saves us in $9,000. Labor costs in 2021 is about $23,000. And I just want to draw council's attention that there is some offsetting costs or impacts to our funding. We have a grant that's about $50,000 a year for child support services. So there's an offsetting impact of that of $7,800 in 2021. So the net of cutting that position in 2021 is about $15,000. My proposed cuts exceeds the requests in 2021 by $5,000. I have not added those back in, but maintained the cuts from 2020 just because I feel like that's really what the intent is here, is how can we as a whole, as a county, save money across the board. I'm also taking the furlough days in 2020. I allowed for 7 right now to see where we are at the end of 2020. I'm not opposed to continuing those into 2021 as well. Council asked about the impacts this will have on my department. We're going to have slower availabilities of documents in the case management system. In an e-filing, we have to have time to process those documents and get them available. In addition, the scanning doesn't completely go away, it only partly goes away. Our overtime, we're going to incur some overtime costs during peak demand. and we will have mandatory services that will be delayed or left undone. And again, I already spoke to the child support grant. We'll have reduced access to passport processing for the public. We're going to do those appointment only just so we can control our workflow. And we're going to have slower response to customer requests for all services, including to our partners. They often ask for adjustments to reports or just help in general. And courtesy items such as mailing of court calendars, we're going to struggle to get our court calendars out at all. So we're going to just have to cut back on some of those niceties that we do. And there will be times that the phone won't be answered as readily. That's happening already. And we'll just have to respond as we can to voice messages. And I just wanted to draw attention to we've stopped maintaining paper files, and the impact for that is save about 4 to 5 hours a week in labor costs. And that saves about $6,500. The other costs of materials is rather minimal. And that's all I have. If you had any questions or I could clarify anything.
Mr. Stevens?
I don't. Thank you.
Mr. Watson?
Nope, you answered my questions in your presentation, so thank you very much.
Mr. Thomas?
No questions for me. Thank you, Lisa.
Lisa, I don't have any questions either. I just want to thank you for stepping up and agreeing to the furlough days as council has as well. Thank you very much for that. Sure. I appreciate your efforts, and I know you've gone through a lot in the rehiring process and have been willing to be supportive of the path we have forward. So thank you very much for your leadership as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ingrid, are you prepared to go? So our next meeting, our next discussion would be council's budget.
If I just know how to share it, we'll be in good shape. Let's see here. Sharing. Cursor. Tony and I had this all laid out, and now we've kind of lost it. Yeah, I can't quite get to the. Do that. I'll do this.
Hold on a second, everyone. Where is the file?
It's the.
This one there?
It's the top one. I don't really see it. Oh, should be the worksheet. There we go. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see. Grab it. Doesn't seem to want to grab, does it? Oh, there we go. Well, hello, Council. I want to draw your attention to our budget worksheet. As you can see, I have highlighted everything that is within my discretionary budget is highlighted in yellow to the left, and those amounts are shown.
Hey, Ingrid, you're not sharing.
I guess we've got to share from the screen. I hear pounding, so
Hold on a second. We're
likely
working on
Tony's
it.
coming this way. Up, and here's Tony.
Do I share from here? Oh, sorry. Oh, it's running off of that, so this monitor. Thank you.
Okay.
It's sure.
Is what, okay, everybody's seeing. Okay. Council, can you see that? Mr. Watson?
Yep.
And Mr. Stevens?
Yep.
Okay. So as I was saying, what you see in yellow there, the blocks to the left, are essentially our discretionary spending in our budget, which is this year was approximately $30,000. $15,000 of that was dedicated to council travel, and then additional money was dedicated to council conferences, mostly being WASAC or whatever other training the council chose to sign up for. Obviously, that has changed, and it is quite likely that WASAC will not be holding their annual conference in November, and my presumption is that the council won't be traveling between now and the end of the year for the most part. So what this revised budget reflects is that I reduced our discretionary budget for 2020 down to $8,780, and I reduced for 21 down to $13,000, approximately $400. And most of that is coming out of council travel because that is our biggest line item, and the rest would be training. As you know, we're a staff of one now, so I didn't do an organizational chart. I'm it, and I've taken on whatever duties that I have been able to wrap my arms around from our former staff council assistant. We don't receive any kind of income or any kind of grant funding, so there's nothing to be gleaned there, and that is pretty much it. I don't have much control over advertising. We do tend to come in less than 4,000, but it just kind of depends on the year and how active staff is with legislation and ordinances, resolutions, public hearings, and the like. If you see anywhere where we could squeeze a little bit more, by all means, bring it to my attention. But we've brought it down to, from 30,000, I've brought it down to 8,000 in 20 and approximately 13,000 in 21, and that's pretty fundamental at this point.
And Ingrid, this chart reflects council taking 7 furlough days this year, correct?
That I believe so, but that would be a question for the auditor, since I don't have access to those numbers.
All right.
I presume that's built in. If it's built into everybody else's.
Yeah, it just says 84 to 82, so I assume that would be the amount. Mr. Stevens, any questions?
No.
Mr. Watson?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Thomas?
No questions for me, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ingrid. All right, so I think we can squeeze in. Judge Jewett, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, great, thank you. Are you ready at this point? Sorry, we juggled schedules around for some of your other court peers. Are you able to speak at this point?
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you, Judge. And I'm sorry, we're going into what was our pre-scheduled 10:45 district court discussion with District Court Judge Jewett.
Yes, good morning. This is Judge Jewett on behalf of San Juan County District Court. Thank you for circling back. So, first of all, just to explain a little bit about what our department does. As you probably recall from our most recent budget cycle, we handle misdemeanor crimes, including jury trials for those crimes. We have probation department for cases that are put on probation. We handle civil lawsuits that are under $100,000, and the larger ones go to Superior Court. Small claims, which are up to $10,000 for some claims and up to $5,000 for other claims. Infractions, protection order petitions, and name change petitions. These are our primary functions. And so what you can tell from this list is that compared to, say, Superior Court, we have smaller, oh, excuse me, it's not showing on the, okay, there we go. So that's the list I was just referring to of what we do. And what you can tell is that we have smaller, shorter cases, but a higher volume caseload. So, misdemeanors occur much more frequently than felonies. Small claims are brought a lot more frequently than lawsuits. And so the majority of jury trials are in district court, but the jury pool is half the size. So we only need to seat 6 jurors to have a trial versus Superior Court, which needs to seat at least 12 and may seat additional alternates. We typically seat 7 total jurors. And just to give you a sense of the considerations that we have when we talk about the pandemic and what are we looking at in order to resume jury trials, district court, we have a smaller number of people that we have to bring into the courtroom, but we are probably going to have many more cases that have to go to trial. And then overall, our caseload is still less than Superior Court because we don't have any family law matters. We don't have the juvenile court or the drug court. So I'm a 0.77 FTE. My position is based on my caseload. And so I'm a 3/4 time position rather than a full-time position. So when we talk about making the budget cuts, what we're considering is how do we achieve those processes, the crimes as well as civil matters in a fair way and cover our constitutional and statutory obligations while still making the 5% cuts. So the proposed budget reductions that we have on our budget worksheet are that we restructured the existing positions as approved by council in June to reduce our total staffing by 0.5 FTE. And additionally, because we've reduced the total number of employees, reducing the benefits associated with 1 FTE because both of the restructured positions were already getting benefits. They were part-time positions that got benefits. Reducing the pro tem budget by cutting judicial vacation time. Judge Loring already addressed this to some extent, which is that in order to have time off, we need to essentially bring in a substitute judge because we really can't fully cover each other. And frankly, for my court, it's a bit problematic to have Judge Loring covering for me most of the time for anything substantial because if she sits on a case substantially and makes real decisions in a case, she cannot review it on appeal. My appeals go to Superior Court. So she will sub in for me for little day-to-day hearings or ex parte things, but I try to get a substitute judge anytime that I need to be out of the office for more substantive hearings. And so some of the pro tem coverage is just for me to take days off. And so we propose reducing the pro tem judge budget, and Judge Loring and I are working together to try to cover each other as best we can for the rest of the year. And I'm also taking a voluntary pay cut. I'm not taking a furlough because when you consider then that I have to pay someone to be in the office when I'm not, or ask Judge Loring to do it, it really doesn't make sense for me to be out of the office. So it's really a fiction for me to be furloughed. But I am taking a voluntary pay cut that's the equivalent of 2 furlough days per month for the end of the year. Wow. So that's 12 total furlough days in 2020. And then we have a number of line item cuts, cutting all travel and training funds through the end of the year for all of our employees, office supplies, and other line items that we were able to reduce. Some of which were naturally just reduced by the lack of court hearings that we had when we were really truly locked down at the beginning of the pandemic, and some of which we will just need to tighten our belts on. So just to give you a sense of what our staffing levels are at, Brendan Cohen just addressed that there are some departments that haven't experienced any growth. District Court is one of them. We haven't increased our staffing, but we did restructure, for many years. But we had our voluntary retirement of our lead clerk, Cynthia Rose. So at the top, the org chart that I provided to you before this hearing was oriented in a 8.5 by 11 portrait mode, but I realized for this presentation it was hard to read. So I've changed it to the same layout, but just in landscape format here. The lead clerk here, Cynthia Rose, she retired. And so rather than filling that position at the legal assistant 5 position, we then have not filled half of an FTE from that position. And we added additional 0.3 FTE to the jury manager to make that a jury manager administrative clerk, and created our civil clerk position, which was 0.8 FTE, increased to full time. And so here, just to give you a sense of the restructuring, includes changing the classification and pay scale as well. So originally we had this lead clerk as legal specialist 5, and then we had these 2 part-time positions who are classified as a legal specialist 3. Although their jobs are very different, their job description and responsibilities are very different. That's the classification that they share. And then in the restructured staffing, we have 0.3 of Cynthia Rose's FTEs now going to a legal specialist 3 position, and the other 0.2 that we asked to increase is under a legal specialist 4. So by changing this full-time position to a legal specialist 4, we're seeing savings as well, just from the reduction in scope, I guess. So with that, we looked at what else we needed to reduce. We made the changes to postage. We expect that we will have quite a bit of mailing at the end of the year here as we go along. And we also, it's difficult to estimate in some ways what we can reduce in terms of jury trials, although we haven't had any trials for several months now. Again, that's only because we've postponed them. It's not because we're not going to conduct them. We expect that when we start conducting jury trials again, because of physical distancing requirements, everything that we do is likely going to take twice as long at the beginning of the trial, because we're going to have a bunch of jurors who won't be able to sit in the same room. We'll need to take them in groups, which will take a substantially longer time, or use alternative facilities, which would take also a substantially longer time to move people back and forth. And then once the jurors are seated and we're going through a trial, many of the things we used to do, we just have to do in a much more time-consuming way. We used to, every time that attorneys would need to argue without the jurors present, we would just send them into a back little room. Obviously, that's not going to be possible because the room is not big enough to accommodate even 6 people. It's really only accommodate 2 people with social distancing. So then you'll have to have the parties changing courtrooms. Superior Court and District Court are working together to make a plan, in which we presented some in our CARES proposal of how we're going to use both courtrooms for any jury trial. But it's just going to take a lot of time. And then Superior Court, when they're having trials, is going to need to use the District Court courtroom, which is going to slow down our other processes. So it's really difficult to estimate what our costs are going to look like once we begin trials in September. But with all these changes and these cuts, we actually came significantly under our 5% goal here. As you can see, that's a negative number and the reduction is still needed. We're 11,000 under. And in 2021, we didn't even make the majority of the line item cuts that we proposed for 2020, and we're still coming under significantly because of the staffing changes that we've made. And I do want to emphasize this just because I do anticipate that at some point in the future, as the economy recovers, we may ask council to consider allowing us to fill back that 0.5 FTE that we're losing now, although we are going to do our best to work with the staffing levels that we have. And I think we can do it. We are going to be really, really strapped just because of the number of people that it takes to man our front desk when there's court in session, and the obligations that we have to remain open every judicial day during normal business hours. Once the pandemic, we have shortened our business hours that our front desk is open to most of the public during the pandemic, but it really won't be permissible to do that for budget reasons. It was only permissible to do it because of the health emergency. So once the health emergency recedes, I'm anticipating that we will be re-increasing our publicly available hours at our front desk. And even still, beyond our normal hours, if someone rings the bell, we are available. We do have someone in the back office so that if someone comes in with a protection order, we can process that for them and get them started on that in a more emergent situation. So that's the overview of what we're proposing here. I think this would be a good juncture if council have questions.
Yes, Judge, real quick. So thank you very much for all this information. The net effect of your reduction request, just for confirmation, is $51,067 for 2020. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stevens, do you have any questions?
No. Thank you for your work on this, Judge.
Mr. Watson?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify a point. Judge Jewett, if either you or Judge Loring take a furlough day, you actually have to pay someone to fill in for you, right?
Yes, and that's why I'm not planning to actually be out of the office I'm not planning on taking time out of the office with that associated pay cut. I'm just going to take the voluntary pay cut.
I understood that, but I just wanted to make sure it was clear that the reason for not taking furlough days is that doesn't really save money because you got to pay someone to be there in your place.
Yes, well, especially in our county. In bigger counties, if you have more judges, it's easier to fill those gaps. But
Yep.
yes, for us, it doesn't really make a lot of financial sense.
Got it. Okay, thank you for
Mr. Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Anything, Mr. Thomas?
No, thank you, Judge Jewett.
Judge, I have one final question for you. What is the amount that the 12 furlough days equates to? Or the reduction in pay for you?
That would be that'll be $6,332.
All right, Judge, I just want to thank you for taking that position. It's very admirable. I really appreciate your desire to really help us personally move forward and still provide the services required in our county. So thank you very much for your leadership on that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all of your considerations.
All right, Judge, thank you. It is now 12 o'clock. We will break until 1:15. Is that all right, Council?
Sure.
Yep.
All right. We will now be in recess for lunch and be back at 1:15. Thank you very much.